Hello, this is the Dear Founder. I'm back. I am back reading some shit. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do I'm just going to screw around with some stuff.
Wow, more real than real.
It's for people, please. How about that?
Wow, more real than real.
It did.
We got Benjamin with Fedora, drink, and opiates. I have an axe, and Local has strawberry slurp.
And so you show the axe to the audience, so you have a very narrow frame of view. So that's pretty.
Yeah, that's good. Again, I think that one is so old.
Right in front of your face. There we go.
Is that what we want?
And my axe.
Yeah, my axe. Yeah, my axe.
I wish I could figure out how to add myself into
To the chat.
Yeah, no, it just doesn't want to. It always, the way that Skype sets up, it has me just in a tiny little box. I don't know whether I look like a moron.
No, you look.
Well,
You look very effective.
that's what I would say. Very effective.
Very 80s.
A little bit.
Okay, good.
What's the style are you going for? Are you going for a sweaty marijuana dealer? High-functioning workout master?
All of the above. Hippie
You're always
festival
saying-
goer.
Yeah, there's always a...
Okay,
Yeah.
Prophet in the wilderness with a raccoon.
Another raccoon,
That's
right?
my son's cat, Gary. Which, you know.
How old is Gary?
Are we live at the moment? Gary is like he's my son's cat. My son picked him. And those two are pretty much inseparable. Yeah. I rarely talk about my personal life, so that's a tiny little tidbit, just an eensy-weensy bit of my personal existence, which I am sharing with the world. I have a son, he has a cat.
And they are inseparable.
Yes. So, what do you boys want to get into today?
Yeah, I was thinking, we left off with, we touched on, a little bit of Russell, but, Cyril. I was
Cyril.
wondering, so we talked about postmodernism a whole lot, but what else is there? What's the his principles?
Hegel.
James's watery liberalism.
Is that watery liberalism? No, it's still fine liberalism. What are we
I
talking
want the strawberry slurpee of liberalism.
about? Who astroturf the Occupy Wall Street movement?
Oh, strawberries.
That's a good question.
Astroturfing. You guys want to define astroturfing? Have you guys been watching that? Are you astroturfers or are you weaponized by astroturfers?
Not to my knowledge. They can send checks if they want. I don't really take to artificial planting on my territory, but people are willing, I'm totally happy to take their money and not do what they want me to do with it. So there is that. So astroturfing is when you have the appearance of a grassroots movement, and usually what happens is there is actually a grassroots movement, and then big money, usually in the form of foundation dollars, jumps in on that, gives it lots of money. Sometimes they directly say, this money is contingent upon these strings. More often what they do is they show up and they say, we love what you do, here's a bunch of money, keep doing it. And then next year when it's like, you want some more money, it's like, well, make some changes to make it a little more effective. And we think you should take these kinds of directions. And you probably already invested some of the money, but the point is you have these kind of foundations, they have their own agendas, they have lots of money behind them that will come in and kind of prop up either, it can be a little more organic, but they might pick direction or dictate direction of the grassroots movement, or they might actually just start propping up the things that are pointing in the directions that they want. So you might have with the Occupy Wall Street thing, I don't know who would have been funding that. It's a good research question somebody should be diving into. You might have, say, woke people, so you know if you get that intersectional hot mess happening, everybody's going to start fighting with each other. So you say, hey, intersectional people, Occupy looks like a site that would be great for you. Here's like $1 million to go show up and be there. And, oh yeah, you know, I'd love to take a year off work and pick $1 million. So probably they would have done it for like $11. But that's what astroturfing is anyway. It's probably the case. It's really kind of hilarity. There were a lot of kind of big organizations. The Koch brothers would be one that was in particular back in 2008 and 9 that are associated with having funded the Tea Party, but the Tea Party was a grassroots organization before the Koch brothers got involved, and it took, from what people who were involved in it originally told me, it took a decidedly more corporate direction after corporate money started jumping into it. And so the left is all pissed about the Koch brothers, but the Koch brothers probably broke up the populist movement and turned it in a different direction quite early on, which would be in alignment with leftist agendas in some sense, except not for the corporate direction. So it's like everything's a little more shadowy, but it's shadowy money going into grassroots organizations to make them now fake grass, in other words, astroturf, that's being laid down by big money.
James, one quick comment. The chat is saying that there's something up with your audio. It sounds okay to me, but it might be that your good microphone is not turned on, or it's just
It's possible. 1 second.
sort of secondary.
Probably.
The AstroTurf that I first encountered, I mean, knowingly encountered, was Reddit in 2016, which is very burning Bernieville. And Bernie was really strong, and then all of a sudden, I don't know if it was after, it was at a certain point, and it was very obvious that things switched to Hillary Clinton, and there was a lot of, I think there was even a news article that said that one of the super PACs for Hillary Clinton is spending millions of dollars to just pave all of social media. And that set the conditions. I think that set the conditions for Reddit turning into a steaming pile of useless propaganda, angry, ranting, one-sided baloney that it is now, except for certain subreddits and stuff. But all the main subreddits are incredibly political and all in one direction. And I think that the astroturfing of it killed it as a more or less balanced, even though cesspit is still a balanced cesspit.
Yeah, that would be definitely an example of that. And my audio should be better. I forgot that I had to do a thing the other day from the hotel, and I didn't have my suite anchored to my desk microphone, so I had to use a different microphone. So props for pointing out that I sounded like crap. So now I hopefully sound better.
But the thing is, if you can get an idea or a set of ideas that are infectious enough and a script that makes people feel strongly enough about repeating the same stuff over and over again, they will even be tricked into not realizing that they're just reproducing the script over and over again. Then you don't really have to pay much money into it. You just prop it up here and there strategically, and it kind of goes on its own. So I think that kind of astroturfing is the astroturfer's wet dream.
That's right. These are not the narratives you're looking for. And that actually, is kind of the sort of thing that the postmodernists, I know we weren't going to talk about the postmodernists, but that's kind of the thing that the postmodernists were talking about, is that, these interests will step in, or even you could say that the critical theorists were talking about this too, is that other, interests that want to control the narrative will step in, and they will make sure that what they want to have become the dominant narrative will become the dominant narrative, and then that creates this sort of legitimation by consensus, or in Lyotard's words, legitimation by chorology, and then people will believe this, and it will become truth, even though tone, and they're going to kind of just stay active enough to make sure that the narrative keeps going in the same direction. These are Herbert Marcuse's so-called heteronymous interests. So power is kind of being pressed into the situation, even to the degree that they were taking up with propaganda by active agents, where the postmodernists would say that what would happen is that these people would come in and they would change the social conditions, and then people would create kind of social groups or social norms that you're just going to repeat certain views. Those are the right views. Everything else is the wrong views. And so they're going to kind of socialize people into speaking and acting and talking in certain ways. So power flows through everybody rather than being imposed by the so-called powerful interests. And there's probably some fact of the matter that both of those things actually occur, or they occur as needed. But as kind of pure philosophies, Marxism would say that, the powerful interests of society are interested in keeping things going in a certain way, and here's what they do to maintain it. And the postmodernists would say, oh, well, it all goes through how it's okay to talk about things, the discourses that they would come in, they would set the discourses, they would engineer the discourses, and then that becomes the norms that everybody participates by. And that's the thing you're describing is kind of the wet dream. So you don't really even have to pay, you just get people to start doing the thing, and the thing becomes kind of self-fulfilling and self-generating. And then
isn't that kind of ideal? That's kind of what people who are anti-woke or pro-liberal kind of want. That everybody wants that to happen in their own direction. I mean, correct. Everybody wants to have a condition.
Everybody who wants like a particular outcome, I guess, would want that, or wants a particular narrative pushed. I find myself not particularly wanting that. So, I don't want to set rules of discourse for people at all myself. I want people to have accurate understandings of various ideas and topics and talk about those from their own perspective. So this is where I get sort of alienated from these kind of power game-based analyses. Maybe it's a secret sauce to my success, but I just don't think that way. So maybe you have outed yourself, and I can now critical Benjamin Boyce theory, and discover that deep inside you actually just want people to think the way that you want them to think.
Well, I would like a certain set of behaviors, right? I would like a certain set of very basic behaviors, like the 10 Commandments of online discourse, or something like that. Just like rules of gentility.
Yeah, some norms are pretty good. Norms are all right.
I mean, that's why you're wearing a shirt, right?
Oh, I wasn't sure if Woku was wearing pants when he got up a second ago, and I was offended
I think
that
it's
my
just one piece of cloth.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, that is why I'm wearing a shirt, but it's not why I brought an axe to the discussion.
You have to put it in front of your face. Woku, what was you had a twitchy thought? You grabbed a book. Just give us a sign when you're ready to.
I can find it. I have to find a quote from the book Beautiful Trouble.
Oh no, that right there is the Handbook of Disasters. Beautiful Trouble, and it's really funny because you hear these politicians. I just saw them talking about we had George Floyd Day, rest in power, and so forth. And so we had George Floyd Day this week, and on George Floyd Day, I saw politicians saying things like, we made good trouble last year. We made good trouble. So they're talking about this good trouble, and of course, beautiful trouble is kind of an artistic extension of that in terms of the terminology. But they mean something really specific. These activists, that's the day, mean something very specific, whether we want to have them as woke activists or whatever activists. They mean something very specific by good trouble. And what they mean is that they're going to disrupt and dismantle the existing systems or subvert the existing systems. So they're going to cause trouble for the purpose of the greater good that they believe that they have the ability to bring into the world. So you have good trouble is something that it should be very concerning when you hear politicians in a liberal society like the United States repeating concepts that are actual agitprop for liberationist and therefore really kind of quasi-communist activity. And then people are like, yes, queen, to literally disrupt and dismantle without necessarily knowing what they're getting involved in.
That phrase, disrupt and dismantle, was heavily employed by the Office of Equity, the Office of setting up the Office of Equity in Washington State government. They
That's
had
right.
formed that.
Equity.
And equity means disrupt and dismantle. Nobody really understands that, but we understand that. So, do you have a sense of what that actually means, other than a flashy kind of sexy term? This is beautiful.
No,
These things sounds like okay.
Disrupt means you have something going on, the operation of society, the running of an institution, and you're going to get in the way of it. Whether it's by throwing sand in the gears, whether it's by turning it upside down, whether it's by showing up and yelling and the so-called heckler's veto, whether it's going to be by blowing air horns, you're going to take whatever it is that's going on and you're going to disrupt that activity so that the normal operation of an institution, normal operation of a city, of a society, of a college, or of a state, in this case, cannot continue as it has been going on. There will be no longer any normal operation. So disrupt means that. Dismantle means that something is, there are, say, institutional pieces in place that keep the system running the way that it does. And that's going to have to be taken completely apart. And then obviously something will replace it. And the idea, of course, with the equity activists is what will replace it will be something under their control because they're going to reimagine, for example, the possibilities of the thing. And that itself is its own special term, but we can come to that in a second. So disrupt and dismantle is not just like, we're going to do stuff. It means the system itself is operating. So we have to, so you can think of it like a car going down the street, and we're going to knock the wheels off of it. We're going to disrupt the motion of the car, or we're going to get in the path of the car so they have to put on the brakes if it's like stopping traffic, or we're going to disrupt the normal operation of things. And then we're going to try to figure out how to take apart the system itself and replace it with something completely different. Now, when they talk about what they're going to replace it with, they're necessarily vague because I could explain at length under going into the Hegel stuff that I've been dropping this week, why they're necessarily vague. Oh yeah, I dropped it in there like an atomic bomb. Just wait till it goes public tomorrow. People are going to lose their marbles. But
they really go crazy when you start talking Hegel.
GWF Hegel, baby. It's the heart and soul of the whole thing. But and of the religion, as a matter of fact. But when they talk about reimagining a system, when they talk about reimagining a system, what they're actually talking about is that the imaginary is the full extent. This is a concept that they have within a lot of theoretical discourse, the imaginary. So the imaginary is the total extent of what people are capable of thinking about. And so when they say that they want to reimagine systems, what they want to say is that everything that we've thought so far about how systems should be created, how they should operate, what we should do, how they should be implemented, institutions, whatever they are, needs to be completely removed. And we're going to just start reimagining a new thing. And that's necessary. So we're going to go outside of the entire list of conceivable concepts that we already have. We're going to go into a new list of concepts that they're going to create and control. Usually, this is an actual phrase that some of their activists use, is that we'll build the plane while we fly it, which is one to really kind of think about for 5 minutes. I get to build the ship as we sail, but build the plane as we fly is a little bit more advanced.
What they really mean, though, is we're going to build the ship or the plane as we crash it sounds like.
That's right. And the reason that it has to be vague is because, as I did a podcast recently, communism doesn't know how. They don't know how. They don't know how it's going to work. But the reason for that, if we want to dip into the Hegel and the mystery of it all, is because they actually believe that society's perfect, but it's corrupted, it's covered up basically in like a shell of corruption and systemic power and evil and problematics, if you will. And that if you just exactly, you start peel that away, you identify all the contradictions, you identify all the problematics, you take away all of that through this process that the Germans call Aufheben, which is, we talked about before. It's the idea of keeping yet destroying and yet going beyond. It has like a triple meaning apparently in German, and which Hegel thought was a very mystical word and very useful for his speculative mystical philosophy. If you could just peel all that away, then the seed of the perfect society is there to grow out of that. It's like the seed of utopia exists within the corrupted world. So if you can just identify and peel back all the corruption, the seed will sprout and utopia will blossom, and we'll figure it out when we get there. So what they're saying is they don't have the slightest idea how this is going to happen. But if they just have, as Marx put it, ruthless criticism of everything that exists, of all the problematics, then they can expose that seed so that it'll germinate and bloom, and then you'll go from Marx, capitalism to socialism to communism and to utopia. Or for people like Marcuse, you'll enter into a liberated state that's past all of the oppressions and all of that. And for the woke, they might say, although post as a prefix means something quite specific, they might say a post-racial society, or that we're going to enter into a society where systems of racism have been completely unmade, not eliminated, unmade. There's a key difference there. So this is really kind of like disruption dismantle has a lot going on behind them. It's not just like, let's get some stuff done. It's let's break the current system, stop its current action, that's disrupt, and break it, that's dismantle.
That would work if what we're talking about is a fireplace. We're gonna stop the fire. We're gonna rebuild the fireplace. And what we're actually dealing with at this level of complexity in society is a nuclear reactor. So I think we can just break down the nuclear reactor and then build it back. There's a lot of things
So-
that are running.
I'd like to toss something in here if I could. So I actually did a thread on this, and it's a little while ago when I said, just the stuff I said, disrupt, dismantle, deconstruct. Wokies say that all the time because in woke world, to disrupt, dismantle, and deconstruct refers to a specific set of strategies. So, disruption. The woke think of oppression in terms of systems, social systems, legal systems, economic systems, and especially systems of language and communication. They think these systems oppress people, and this is key, even if we don't realize it. So the woke think we must stop these systems from being allowed to continue or function. We must disrupt the functioning of these systems. A disruption is anything that prevents a system the woke deem oppressive from going about its everyday functioning. So there's two types of disruption. There's a physical disruption and a conceptual disruption. A physical disruption is when the woke physically interfere with something and attempt to hijack, ruin it, or stop it. So that might be something like pulling the fire alarm during the Jordan Peterson talk. Something like that. A conceptual disruption is to say or do something that intervenes in a narrative or discourse. So, if during a testimony time at church, someone got up during their turn and told the church that they were racist, they might have disrupted racism in the church. That's what they would say that. So, a conceptual disruption occurs anytime someone interrupts a narrative or discourse by injecting wokeness as the new narrative or discourse, or challenging that narrative or discourse by throwing themselves into the discourse to disrupt the way that discourse perpetuates itself or reinscribes itself into the functioning of society. A physical disruption occurs when someone does something that hijacks, destroys, or derails an oppressive system. So, cutting down power lines might be a way of disrupting. Interfering with the talk, a heckler's veto. So now dismantling is something the woke do to systems, or anything the woke say is a system or institutions. Okay? An incomplete list of things the woke might say they want to dismantle are capitalism, governments, universities, churches, businesses, the police, etc., etc. To dismantle something is to take the thing apart so it can no longer function at all. So you want to disrupt it. So let's use the analogy of a car. I want to disrupt the car. I'm going to throw a spike belt down so I disrupt the car by stopping it. Once I've shredded its tires and it's stopped, then I can dismantle the car once it's stopped and take it apart. So first you want to disrupt the function, then you want to take the thing apart, right? Dismantling can take a few different forms. An example of dismantling would be if a woke group took over a church by voting themselves onto the board, and then voted to fire the pastor, and then voted to get rid of the statements of faith, and then sold the building. They would have dismantled the church. Or, if a group gets themselves voted as the town council, defunds the police, fires the officers, and then repeals the laws that gave the police their power. That would be to dismantle the police. There are violent ways to dismantle things as well. So if a group wanted to violently dismantle a 13th century monarchy, they might loot the palace, break the crown and scepter, and kidnap the king. Okay? So, again, notice there are two ways of doing all of this. There's always the discourse way, which is to destroy the narrative or to take apart or to to abolish the Constitution or vote out the laws, and then there's the violent takeovers, right? There's always multiple ways of doing this. The woke often disrupt institutions and systems they want to dismantle. When they lack the power to fully dismantle something, they may opt to disrupt it where they can, right? Because they might not be able to fully rip it apart. So they might not be able to dismantle the university, but they can pull the fire alarm during Jordan Peterson's talk. We can cut the cord to the microphone. We can disrupt it. And deconstruction is the thing that they do on the discourse. Deconstruction is the way the woke attack, subvert, and undermine the meaning of the concepts, words, language, ideas, art, discourses, text, symbols, and anything else we use to convey meaning. This is done to destroy the conceptual entities that we use to build the systems and to build our society. What the woke see is the systems of oppression, right? So we have a bunch of ideas, thoughts, beliefs that we're going to use in building our society, and the woke want to attack those concepts and show those concepts to be meaningless, inadequate,
openly harmful,
otherwise useless. Yeah, they want to destroy those concepts. They want to deconstruct the meaning that we've built into them. So they will try to redefine our language, change the meaning of words, reinterpret the law, reinterpret art and media, all to say it's bigoted, and usually this takes the form of trying to find new ways of interpreting the ideas, concept theories, etc., and leveraging the new interpretations against the old interpretations to create a conflict which they can say will only be solved via adopting their woke worldview. But it can also take the form of mockery and parody to try and trivialize something, right? So deconstruction always operates at the level of meaning and discourse. Deconstruction seeks to destroy the meaning of ideas, because doing so sucks the power out of ideas so that they can't function. And whatever is held together by those ideas, in this case our society, starts to come apart, and the woke want that so they can have their little revolution. So a brief recap here is you disrupt, thus hijack the stop systems of institutions from functioning, disrupting the talk, blocking access to community, things like that. Dismantle to take it apart and destroy an institutional system that they deem oppressive. So that might be, again, you vote yourself onto the board of a local church and then vote out all the statements of faith, and then to deconstruct, and that's how the woke attack the meaning of conceptual entities we use to build a society. If you put all three of those things together, you get a potent cocktail of tools and strategies for tearing down society from inside, which is exactly what the goal of woke is. They literally want a complete revolution. Right? Does that all?
Yeah.
Is
James,
that all clear to everyone?
You
Yeah,
shared
the
that
key thing that's
Beaverton. You shared that like some sort of teacher training or something about public school teachers in a training in Beaverton, Oregon, just today. And it was exactly what you start to see that this is the pattern of behavior. Why are they spending so much time trying to interrupt everything? They literally are saying we need to inject this stuff into every single activity that every single person is doing. When you're grading a test, you need to stop doing that and reevaluate this through a racist, anti-racist lens. So every single thing that you do is literally interrupted by this cognitive structure of anti-racism, which is not necessarily defined, but it just basically really gums up the ability for the institution as a whole to do anything other than perpetuate these ideas that themselves are just designed to gum up.
That's right. And so with deconstruction, that was like a super awesome summary. The word that Local dropped in there was subvert, and that's really the point of a deconstruction, is to subvert the activity that's actually going on. And you hear them talk about subversion or being or seeking to subvert systems or whatever. And it's a kind of a more pessimistic approach, because with disrupt and dismantle, there's almost this assumption that you have the power to disrupt a thing, or you have the power to take it apart. Right? It requires you to be able to apply power to stop something that's already happened, or to take something apart that exists. With subverting, it's kind of grosser. It's like getting inside, and as Wolf said, it's rearranging the meaning and changing the meaning of the terms that are being used. So where he gave the example, in the church, that disrupting racism in the church might step up and have somebody say, don't you think that was a little bit racist? And all of a sudden shocks everybody, disrupts the flow of the dialogue that was occurring. That's disruption. Of course, dismantle, you take over, you start voting people out, you change the entire structure. Subverting would be to take, say, for example, the scripture that the sermon is based upon, and start asking unsettling questions about what those terms really might mean. A great kind of example that you could look at all three of these in kind of one lens would be, because I've given this one before, so I've thought about it a little bit, is the Fourth Amendment, which prevents the illegal search and seizure of property in the United States. So individuals have their property protected from government search and seizure, but it doesn't apply to stolen property. So a subversion there would be to come in and say, well, isn't in some sense all property really stolen because it was produced by the labor theory of value? So somebody's labor went into this and they weren't properly compensated, so it was actually stolen, or we made it on stolen land, or it was built off of a slaveocracy, and the foundations of the entire economy were stolen from black people. And so we're, disrupting the Fourth Amendment would say, come in and say, we're going to take we're going to halt the application of this in certain circumstances, and dismantling it would be that we're going to get rid of the amendment entirely. Subverting would come in and say, let's change the meaning of the words or the concepts that are being employed so that the Fourth Amendment might remain completely intact, and yet we're going to interpret it completely differently now because we've changed the meanings underlying the things that are involved. And so, for example, if Harvard University wants to come out and say repeatedly that it exists on stolen land that they want to acknowledge, maybe the federal government should just seize all of Harvard's land because it's all stolen, then the Fourth Amendment doesn't protect them any longer from that. But it's scarier if they start saying that basically under, say, Marx's labor theory of value, that everything is essentially stolen. Under the 1619 Project, that the entire economy of the United States was stolen from slavery, or from the slaves, actually, by forcing them to do labor. So everything in some sense is really stolen. Therefore, now there's this justification to not just say we should pay reparations, but to seize people's financial resources and reparate with them, because technically it was stolen in the first place. And that's a subversion of the concepts. And you'll notice that it requires very little power to subvert a concept. All it requires is to kind of be like the little devil that pops up on your shoulder and asks what seems to be a very point-missing and impertinent question.
Well, it does
take, really the heart of it.
It does take consensus insofar as you need enough people in power to affect that.
That's right. It operates through soft power. And that's why disrupt and dismantle, like I was describing, the power, the beliefs about power between critical theory or neo-Marxism earlier, they think of it one way, that's very disrupt and dismantle, whereas postmodernists saw this as very discourses oriented and very social consensus oriented, and therefore they wanted to create conditions under which they can engineer control through discourse engineering, as our friend Mike Naina refers to it. That's his brilliant term for this.
Mikey's in the chat.
Is he? Good for him.
Shout out to Mike
Discourse
Naina.
engineering, we're going to get this into the mainstream, man. So discourse engineering, though, what they want to do is they want to take control of the way that meaning and concepts are used so that they can create social consensus that allows the soft power, the soft social power that works through everybody instead of kind of top down. Black Lives Matter showing up and blocking a road is not power working through all the people, right? Black Lives Matter convincing everybody, on the other hand,
Well, it's
that
the
if
power
they're
of frustration
allowed-
working through everybody.
Well, I mean, it's a form of just a straight application of power, right? To show up and block the highway. It's another thing entirely, however, to come in and step in and say, well, the highway really, was built off of, the labor of somebody that had it stolen from them, so we have every right to do this. Or to come in and say that what we're actually doing is we're challenging the racism that's perpetuated by the highway system in and of itself. So to get people to go along with it, so to get people to paint Black Lives Matter Plaza down the street and then later, I guess, pave over that because mission accomplished or whatever, that's more of a subversive soft power, trying to get, like you said, trying to get a consensus around to build this idea, oh yeah, maybe this, like right now, if I guarantee you, if Biden administration stepped in and said, Stanford, your land is stolen land, we're taking it back, Stanford would all of a sudden have an army of lawyers saying, wait a minute, not going to happen. But if you can get enough people to believe that first,
Yeah, okay.
now you have the consent, the parology, the consensus necessary to where Stanford won't have any ability to stand on its own 2 feet. They bring out their lawyers and everybody just says, oh, those lawyers are racist. And enough people believe it, it goes. Of course, that's what we've seen play out, and we've also, I think, I use the word play out in a clever double meaning there. I think we've also seen
Here's the thought.
Okay. We also should do a internal server error wrapper. I'm going to do that right now, actually. Yeah, that's good enough. I prefer writing really verbose vanilla JavaScript than to use, jQuery or some shit like that. Um, And we need to edit our router. Actually, I kind of like this. I mean, I like this shitty web framework that I've written. It's shitty, but I mean, I understand how it works. That was my error. Okay. Method. I can't believe that works. I can't believe that actually works. No fucking way. I can't believe that works. This is gonna be cool. Let's get help. That's right. No, that's not going to work. Nope. Let's can't believe that actually works. Okay, I got to add some interface stuff onto here, but wow. This is cool. Hey. I could probably get yaws to work as a reverse proxy as well. Okay. Wow. Dude. I should be recording my face. I'm so, like, happy I got this done. I mean, it's not done, but it's close. Okay. I can't believe that actually works. Wow. Dude. Dude! I'm so happy. Okay. Whew. Calm down. Hi, mittens. Hello. I'm in a good mood, so I'm going to put up with you and your snitching. Wow. I can make like a full tour of logic with this. Because it's just an API. kitty. Kitty, 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 why are you such a bitch? Why are you such a bitch? I'm in a good mood. Ow, mitten. I'm just thinking earlier today, images didn't work. And now I've almost got WFC working. Hi, sweetie. Zlib, that's complexity I don't need right now. That's not the bottleneck. The bottlenecks in your web applications are from doing shit that's just fucking retarded. And it's not from fucking Zlib. It's from being retarded. Okay. What I do, I write optimized code. I don't worry about, fucking lol benchmarks. Because 99, I mean, that's not... Anyway.
And the conceptual structures of society. Because in the same way we think, politics is downstream of culture, they would say society is downstream of ideas and of thought. And we think in language. We use language, ideas, theories, concepts, texts, in order to communicate ideas and to teach ideas, to form consensus, to create institutions. If they can control the language, you're a hop, skip, and a
Let's go bootstrap components. I don't need, no, that's not quite what I want. Okay. What is a modal? Ah, that's not what I want. Don't need that.
Jump away from controlling thought, which is really what they're after. They want to engineer the limits of the discourse. They want to control the Overton window. That's what they want. So everything that they do is geared toward controlling the discourse. And they'll do it by any means necessary. It does not matter. This has been playing out in the free speech kind of debate about the bills that are being passed against critical theory. I recently saw somebody say, because there was a diversity training that was supposed to happen at a high school, a mandatory diversity training. I think it was BHS High School, I can't remember what it was called. And parents found out who was doing the diversity training and why, and it was very standard white privilege, patriarchy, woke theory, and parents called up and demanded that this training be taken out of the high school, and it was. And so the training got canceled. In a literal sense, there was a mandatory training that was supposed to occur, and the mandatory training got canceled. And so these people were saying, look, this is chilling free speech. And then I sat there and I just thought, wait, you guys have turned this on its head. That is a mandatory training by the state. The people have a right to protest against anything that the state does. So when they say there's a chilling effect, what they mean is, if the people can cancel the social justice training because they don't like the wokeness, that shows displeasure with social justice and wokeness generally, and then might make social justice movement people reticent to go out and implement their views. And so the view, what they're saying then, because chilling of free speech, when we talk about this, we're usually talking about the government using power to try and shut people up. But that's not what happened here. It wasn't that the government came in and said, we're going to shut you up. It's people saying to the government, you're not going to do this. You're not going to mandate this training. It wasn't a volunteer thing. This wasn't a public university holding an optional, colloquium or something like this. This was a mandatory training that the parents got canceled. Because the parents didn't want the state to do that. Now, if the state wants to spend $1 saying that the sky is blue, the people have a right to demand transparency about why they spent the dollar and whether or not they think the sky is blue. Because the government is run by the people, right? So the view here is, when they're talking about the chilling of speech, what they're saying is, look, you've shown displeasure toward our woke diversity training, and that's going to chill speech. Because to them, if anything that is pushing back on wokeness, even if it's perfectly legitimate, and I pointed this out, I said, look, the government doesn't have a right to compel listening. And if parents want to cancel something, parents are allowed to cancel something. It's their money. And they can vote you out if you don't do it. So if the parents demand that a school board do something, and the school board doesn't do it, the parents have every right to vote people out. Right? That's mandated state speech with a captive audience. And yet they said, well, this is going to chill speech everywhere. And they said, these bills that are being passed are going to chill speech. All right. How are they going to chill speech? Is it a government crackdown? No. It's a parental crackdown on what the government is teaching. Yep. And so the concept here is that when we talk about freedom of expression with respect to something like the First Amendment, but compelled belief is absolutely out. Cracking down on speech for political reasons outside of time, place, and manner restrictions is absolutely out. I mean, the First Amendment is very, very, very robust. So when we're talking about chilling speech, having parents come in and say, you're not allowed to mandate the teaching of a particular worldview, you're not allowed to mandate a training that includes those ideas, that's not the chilling of speech. That's parents saying, you're not entitled to a captive audience on our dime. Right, so does everyone see how that worked? Because what they're thinking of the chilling of the speech is, the way that the speech is chilled is by the social disapproval expressed by the parents when the parents say no. That's not the chilling of speech in having the government demonstrate the power and the willingness to arrest dissenters. Those are two different things. In one case, the speech is chilled by the government's willingness to arrest things, and in the other speech, it's chilled via social disapproval. And those are two different things. And do you see how those things get mixed together? And part of what I want to do is, with all of these bills that are being passed, I want people to be able to see that the bills, at least the ones I defend, are not ones where they're throwing ideas out or censoring university professors. That's abhorrent. Those bills should be cut up. And I've said on Twitter a number of times that the people who write the bills should be following the advice and the public comments by the Foundation for the Individual Rights in Education, the FIRE.org, and should be allowing freedom of speech and should be curtailing anything that has freedom of expression. That being said, parents do have a right to decide, parents and voters do have a right to decide what is in the curriculum. And being hired as a teacher how can I put this? Freedom of expression does not mean that by virtue of becoming a teacher, you are now allowed to use your teaching position as a soapbox to forward a particular ideology, or to present one particular ideology or truth, or to indoctrinate. So, parents have every right to say, we don't want you to present wokeness, critical theory, Christianity, and Buddhism, to present them as truth. There is a right. Now, you might say, well, what about creationism? Well, separation of church and state means you can't present creationism as truth, right? But neither is the teacher allowed to get up in the middle of the classroom and say, there is no God, you must become an atheist. Or to dock marks to students who are religious or whatever else, right? So the problem that's created here, the reason why this is so fine-grained a distinction, is because what the world do is they teach the teachers to teach all of the curriculum through the lens of wokeness. So that everything that gets taught through the lens of wokeness. Which is why you have to add additional and more robust curriculum guides and legislation to be able to say, wait a second, when you teach math, and you say 1 plus 1 equals 2, you can't use as your example, all of the racist Americans equals 200 million. All of the anti-racists equal 100 million. How many racists must be converted to anti-racism before we have a properly functioning democracy in America? And that's our math problem. Like, you're not allowed to hijack the math problem by doing that. Or if somebody says, today we're going to learn about technology, you can hijack that real quick too. Someone says, the computer was a great invention, and you say, okay, who can afford a computer, who can't, who benefits? And then you're off to the races about social inequality, and you can teach wokeness, right? And you can just weave it into the curriculum by teaching everything through that lens, which is why parents are saying, you can't do that. And when the people are crying free expression, they're saying, I as a teacher should be allowed to have a certain amount of control over my classroom. But that doesn't mean you can take your free time or your personal ideology and weave them into the concepts that you're teaching like Henry Drew taught you to. That's not permitted. So when I read these bills, what I'm looking for is, are these bills
cordoning off wokeness? Like putting it in, you can teach it, but you can't teach everything through it, right?
That's right. If you want to present CRT as one option among many, I don't have a problem with that. But if you want to make critical race theory the lens through which the social studies curriculum is taught, that's something else. Or if you want to present critical race theory as obviously the most compelling, like if you're going to say, well, I'm going to teach 90% critical race theory, and I will, on the last day, mention there are racist Enlightenment liberals who don't like this, that would amount to the same thing, right? So the bills that I push, or that I agree with, are the bills that say you can't indoctrinate, you can't inculcate, you can't compel belief, you can't compel speech, you can't compel any of those things. You have to pull back on that, and teachers don't have the right, and here's a nice term, you don't have a right to subvert the curriculum by inculcating your own beliefs and weaving your ideology into everything, right? Now someone's going to come along and someone has said, but wait, that's already disallowed because you're not allowed to create a hostile environment for people. And this is where the subversion is, because the woke are going to say, look, the environment was always already hostile. Woke, this is how we make it not hostile.
Yep.
Right? The system, the oppressive white patriarchy, which is built into the curriculum, has to be reconstructed by the teacher in order.
Really? Let's try this. Why? Really? Why on earth? Why? What the fuck? Why does this cause a crash? Oh, god damn it. Son of a bitch. So I want to downgrade my Bootstrap version.
To stop the hostile reinscribing of white supremacist patriarchy via the curriculum. That's what they're going to argue.
Well,
So,
that's the
what I'm
argument.
saying-
Like, you were saying you don't want everything taught through the lens of critical race theory, which is CRT, Brother Charles, or wokeness or whatever. But their argument is that everything is always already taught through a supremacist lens. This lens that we aren't even aware of is already we're trying to fracture that lens because it has a hold over everything. So what is the counter to that? I mean, other than the fact that it completely destabilizes everything, it's a great tool for disruption and dismantling. But is there not some sort of measured way to gauge to what extent are we forwarding some sort of limited viewpoint of this? And is the way of doing that purely negative, saying I'm going to strain as much bias as possible, I'm going to look for some sort of empirical test, like enlightenment scientific values, are those doing to strain or to check, to recheck that singular lens?
This is one part of the problem. Maybe I'm going to kick this to James in just a second, but I want to say, well, maybe James, you could answer this. The woke aren't going to admit that there's any neutral ground that you could possibly teach from anything. The critical pedagogist, the person who's teaching critical pedagogy, which is the critical social justice pedagogy, isn't going to grant you that you could have a neutral place to stand. They're going to say, and Henry Drew, I think explicitly states this, that postmodernism points out that there's neutral ground to stand. So, because you're always and that's the always already, it is always the case, and it is the case now that you're teaching from some perspective. Teaching from our woke perspective is just our dismantling of you teaching from your white supremacist perspective. So, they're not going to grant us that it's possible to have viewpoint neutrality. They would dispute the possibility of that. And so they say, because we can't have viewpoint neutrality, that's a chimera that we shouldn't even look for. And is that, I'm going to kick that to James, but I think that's my reading of that.
Yeah, that's what they think. And, it's very difficult to get around that in some kind of a comprehensive way. My main man, Helen, doesn't try to get around that. She says, no, I unapologetically do have a bias. I unapologetically do have a lens. It's classical liberalism or whatever liberalism, and we're going to do that and screw you. Like, more or less.
Well, no, but she'll defend it. I mean, in true classic liberal terms, she's like, here's where I'm going to stand, and I'll argue it to death with you. She doesn't say, or else.
That's right. And from there, you actually do have room, because you can say, well, let's look at the fruits. Let's see what happens. And what you are doing is actually causing massive amounts of problems, and what we were doing maybe isn't perfect, but it was causing less problems, and we can actually adjudicate that. So Helen's approach has a lot of strength to it. And so her approach is to kind of lean into a criticism that's very common of liberalism. You know, liberalism's often said it believes itself to be without ideology, and then people nail it by saying, but everything's an ideology, including liberalism. And Helen's like, of course it is. Of course it is, and it's the best one. And is completely unapologetic about that. And then she's like, here's the proof. And like, by the way, have you seen the last 500 years? And, you know, just basically lays it out. Look at infant mortality, look at this, look at that, look at the other thing. You know, kind of goes into a very Steven Pinker kind of defense, empirical defense of the fruits of liberalism and the fruits of capitalism. And which is funny because Helen's kind of a socialist. And defends the capitalism anyway, because as she's told me in the past, because she knows it works. And so, you know, that is actually one approach to dealing with that. The other approach, the one that I try to tend to favor, is actually that I think it's a canard to say there is no neutral position. I think that's asking a question that's not a legitimate question. I'm not saying that I believe there is a neutral position, but I believe that neutrality is an ideal. I believe that it's something that we can live up to, or we can live up to, or try to live up to. Merit is an ideal that we can try to live up to, and even without its perfection being there. And so, for example, if the claim is things are biased, therefore we have to introduce more biases, I completely disagree with that argument. You know, we need a white perspective, a black perspective, an Asian perspective, a Chinese perspective, a Mexican perspective, a disabled perspective. No, we don't need we don't need a kaleidoscopic, as their literature refers to it, perspective. And in fact, there's no time for this. What we need to do is try to cut down to where, for example, in mathematics, I'm a math PhD. There's not a whole lot of ideological perspective going on in mathematics. There's literally just adding up numbers and stuff. It's not that complicated. I can understand where you might be concerned that there's an ideological lens in, say, history or literary interpretation or the literary canon, but nevertheless, I think it's perfectly consistent to say we are going to actually strive to not add more biases, but rather to properly question any biases that might be present. And while maybe we cannot maintain perfectly neutral territory, we're going to look for that rather than trying to stand on 50 pieces of land at the same time and argue it out in a very kind of fractured way. So there's a different approach to answering that question, which I think you actually can combine, because liberalism within it contains pluralism, which is basically what I've argued for.
There's something, if you allow me, like, kind of a metaphorical way of thinking, but there's something that I'm picking up here, is that you can only get to this ideal through exemption, or through a negative. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that, rather than a positive. You have to do this, you shall do this, right? And by which I mean, in order to protect a very fruitful, functional system of society and connection of institutions, you can bar certain sorts of behavior. It's easier to bar the behavior, figure out how to strain ideological purity or strain these different forms of extremism or fundamentalism or beliefs that take over everything by setting up negative rules. And I think of that because one thing you were saying about the laws that you promote that are anti-critical race theory or CRT say no on this, no on that, no on that. The same thing with union things. The same thing with that Trump executive order. You can't vilify one group. You can't teach that that American history is based on some sort of evil machinations or whatever. There's a bunch of negative statements that can then. It's the best way to get to what we want through negative laws rather than through positive laws that dictate.
So, I think I'd like to inject just a little bit of heresy there for a moment. In John chapter 1 it says, "And the Word became flesh and made its dwelling among us." I think that the First Amendment incarnated itself in the flesh and made its dwelling among us in the person of Greg Lukianoff, who is the executive director of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. And in Acts chapter 1, when it talks about the tongues of fire falling on the apostles so that they can speak, that in this translation it says the fire, and it's coming down on the students and allowing them to speak in spite of the censorious administration. So I just wanted to inject that heretical line of thinking into the conversation. Because
all 5 people that got it really got it.
Yeah, I have so much respect for Greg McKeown and what the fire does, and the reason that I picked negative is because when we're talking about law, we want to constrict ourselves to being very, very narrow, because when it comes to speech and to teaching and law, the moment you make a positive law about what's being taught, you're verging into the area of compelled speech or compelled belief. I would want to be very, very careful. Outside of, I think that K-12 public school education, you can legislate a curriculum, right? You could do that. So we have to teach math. We have to teach this. We have to teach that. I don't think that's compelled speech. But we want to construe our laws very, 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 very narrowly, which is why I say, we should construe ourselves and constrict ourselves to K-12 public schools, right? And then within that, we should be picking very narrowly, we should be plucking out things very narrowly that the woke are trying to do in order to inculcate their worldview. That's a legal strategy, okay?
And it's consistent with the First Amendment.
Yes, that's
which is
what I
also
want to
phrased
do.
negatively, right?
Which
Congress
I
shall
don't,
make
yes.
no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, for the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances.
So when it says Congress shall make no law, that's a negative thing as well, so that's going to shape what the legal strategy is, and so I want to be very careful that the laws that go on. That's why I say, when people say, you want to ban CRT, I say, I don't want to ban CRT. What I want to do is prevent CRT from becoming the default lens that sets the tone, the aura, the ethos, the atmosphere of the classroom in which the children are being taught. I don't want it to be.
Alright, I gotta work on this. I think I'll downgrade to the older version of Bootstrap, just because it has code listings. Like, I don't know why they would have removed that. And then, but I can just do it for the single file. That's easy enough. And I don't have to do things for the whole project. That's nice. I can just move my www Orange Pill Healthcare. I can move the Haskell script and all that nonsense back into here because that's the Haskell static site generator is fine. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm gonna go take a break.